Hey, and welcome back to another video. I'm Nia, and this is Plays by Playwrights. So this week's play is none other than Arsenic and Old Lace by Joseph Kesselring. And the way I got introduced to it was on Amazon in a very similar fashion to how I got introduced to Fleabag for the first time. I saw this cover and I saw the title and it was very intriguing to me, so I put it on my wish list. And around the same time I got Fleabag, I actually got Arsenic and Old Lace. Then later on in my theater class, one of them, we had an assignment in which we had to pick a play and learn how to essentially put on a production of it. We had to figure out the budget, who were we going to cast, what theater we were going to put this on at. And my group decided we had the option of doing a musical or a play, but my group decided to do a play. And we were just bouncing ideas off of one another on what play we should do. And I brought up the idea of Arsenic and Old Lace. And I told them I had not read it at that point in time, but I was just really intrigued, and I think it could be a good read. And ironically, one of my friends, we will call her Iris, her grandfather had seen the play before and knows about it, and she was my number one champion for us to research this play. So that's what we decided on, and once I read the play, I really enjoyed it. Arsenic and Old Lace was first ever presented by Howard Lindsay and Russell Krauss at the Fulton Theater in New York, now commonly known as Helen Hayes Theater, on August 18th, 1941, with the following cast. And if I mispronounce any of these names, please forgive me. Abby Brewster, played by Josephine Hall. The Reverend Dr. Harper, played by Worley Britch. Teddy Brewster, played by John Alexander. Officer Brophy, played by John Quigg. Officer Klein, played by Bruce Gordon. Martha Brewster, played by Jean Adair. Ellen Harper, played by Helen Brooks. Mortimer Brewster, played by Alan Jocelyn. Mr. Gibbs, played by Henry Herbert. Jonathan Brewster, played by Boris Karloff. Dr. Einstein, played by Edgar Stelly. Officer O'Hara, played by Anthony Ross. Lieutenant Rooney, played by Victor Sutherland, and Mr. Witherspoon, played by William Parks. That was the original cast, and I must say that this play was really interesting. Something about this play that stood out to critics and audiences alike was its comedic, satirical, and absurdist vision for its time period. Fun fact, when it first aired on Broadway, during its run, it had over 1,400 shows, which was astounding for its time period. It also got adapted into a movie, but this play essentially is about these two sisters who are well into their 60s, named Abby and Martha, and they live in this Victorian-style house in New York. And they are very charitable people. And what they decide to do is they rent out their rooms, their spare rooms, to homeless, sad, depressed, lonely, any of that combination, Christian men. And instead of actually renting out the rooms to them, when they hear that they are normally these renters tend to be they don't have any family left over, they have been in the dumps a lot, they don't have a place to live, the sisters decide to poison the renters with a combination of arsenic among other substances through elderberry wine. So in this particular play, their nephew, Mortimer, he is a drama critic, which ironically parallels a lot to Joseph Kesselring in the fact that he used to teach theater and music at a very conservative school. Why I bring this up is because Mortimer does not like theater. He likes musicals. Ironically, he reminds me a little bit of a friend that I have. We'll call him Jacob. Jacob really likes musicals but despises plays. And ironically, we're in the acting strand together, not the musical theater strand. So that's very funny. But Mortimer does not really care for plays all that much and tends to be very cynical in terms of critiquing them. And he can be considered the only normal one in this whole family. They also have two other nephews, one by the name of Teddy, who believes he is Teddy Roosevelt, and another who gets introduced later, named Jonathan, who is quite the character. So in this play, Mortimer is essentially trying to get his aunts to see that Teddy needs to be put away because he genuinely believes that he is Teddy Roosevelt. It's very genuinely believes it. I believe, I'm not diagnosing anyone nor trying to anything along the lines of that. However, in today he would be considered to have some form of a mental illness, most definitely. He tends to imagine himself as Teddy Roosevelt. He constantly talks about Teddy Roosevelt's endeavors related to American politics and his life after he left the White House, and just a plethora of other things. But aside from that, Mortimer is trying to get his sons to see that Teddy needs to be in an institution, and also their killing of these innocent men is wrong. The way that Mortimer finds out about them killing these men is he comes down. He was in New York, but he constantly frequents at their home, and he was minding his own business after he was speaking with his significant other named Elaine, and just so happens to see a dead body in the bay window of their home. He, of course, is very, very freaked out, and ironically, right before he finds the body, he had proposed to Elaine, and he was speaking to his aunt, and she was saying, I really hope you all can see something. They were supposed to go to the theater that night. She was saying, I really hope you all can see something that's really cool and really romantic at the theater tonight. And then he said that the title of the play, I'm paraphrasing here, it was something along the lines of Dead Man, something like that. And he essentially said that the second the curtain opens, you see a dead man. So ironically, he lifted the curtain, and there was in fact a dead man by the name of Mr. Hoskins, who was Methodist. Yes, he was Methodist. So Mortimer is, of course, freaked out because he's like, how did this happen? And then once he learns that his aunts actually killed the poor man, he is very perturbed. Later on, they get a visit from his other brother who's been away for quite some time, named Jonathan. Now, fun fact about Jonathan, he was actually in the original production played by none other than Boris Karloff. And in the script, people constantly reference the character to look a lot like Boris Karloff. Now, something about Boris Karloff that's very important to mention, Boris Karloff actually played Frankenstein in the original Frankenstein. So, and Mortimer has gone through constant facial plastic surgery to change his appearance. That way he can run from the police, because ironically, he does something very similar to his aunts. It's just less out of the kindness of his heart. And he gets this surgery done constantly, and his face looks a lot like Frankenstein's. So the line of "you look like Boris Karloff" is essentially saying he looks like a Frankenstein, and that's really, really funny. But off of that tangent, they get a surprise visit from Jonathan, who was quite the heinous child growing up, and he is trying to insist that they allow him and his friend Dr. Einstein to stay in the house for as long as they want, and also to run an underground plastic surgery facility in what used to be the sister's father's old workspace. So the play in itself, it touches a lot on ideals of absurdism and morality and the idea of right versus wrong. And Mortimer really inhabits trying to get his sons to see that what they're doing is wrong, but that doesn't work out in the best way. What ends up happening is, while Mortimer does get, eventually he does get kicked out. It took a while, but he got kicked out, thankfully. Teddy has this bulge. It's like a gun of some sort, and he constantly blows it. Now, when he blows it, it makes a huge noise, and it can be heard all throughout the neighborhood. So the neighbors constantly complain, right? The police officers come to the house because at late one night, while Jonathan was over, Teddy blew this bulge. And that was essentially the final straw for not only the community, but the police officers. So they were saying that Teddy needs to be sent to a mental institution, right? They were having the paperwork already filled out, Martha and Abby, to have Teddy sent to a place called Happydale, which was for the not so mentally okay, who didn't have anyone to take care of them, or in some cases didn't want to take care of them. But that was for after they were to pass away. In this case, Mortimer really takes the stronghold here and is very adamant. From the beginning, he was adamant that Teddy needed to be sent away. But right here, he takes in charge that Teddy needs to be sent away. And he actually ends up calling the Happydale superintendent and getting him to allow Teddy to make an early reservation. Martha and Abby, understandably, are very upset about this, and they decide to say that no, if Teddy's going, then we're going too. And the whole family tries to play off of this ideal there are bodies in the basement, which there quite literally are. There's 13 bodies in the basement, 12 of which the sisters have partaken in their death. The other one, Mr. Spalazzo, was was Jonathan's kill. And he actually was trying to get Mr. Spalazzo buried in the cellar. That way he would not have to worry about any legal repercussions. But the whole family plays off of this idea of there are bodies in the basement, and the police officers don't believe them because they're just like, guys, be for real, right? And the sisters end up checking themselves essentially into Happydale. They leave the house to Mortimer. Jonathan gets sent away. Teddy's also at Happydale, and Mortimer and Elaine can live happily ever after. But before the ending happens, Mortimer actually finds out that the reason why he doesn't partake in these interesting fantasies that the rest of his family does, and previous ancestors did as well, is because he is not biologically a Brewster. His mother actually used to work for the Brewster family, and she was already pregnant when she was employed. However, the Brewster the Brewster uncle, who was allegedly Mortimer's father, married Mortimer's biological mother and raised Mortimer as his own, along with Jonathan and Teddy. So Mortimer is not actually a Brewster, and this was a huge thing for him because he was very spooked at his family's extracurricular activities, and he was like, if this is a gene in our family, I'm not passing it down. And he was like, I don't think I can marry Elaine because I don't want to have kids with this gene. So that's the overview of this play. I think this play was very comedic, I must admit. The dialogue was so quick-witted and spot on that there were certain parts that I was rolling in, and there was also parts that were just so complex in these ideals of morality that I thought were very subtle hints of a bigger picture. If I had to put a specific characteristic or any describing word to some of these characters, especially Mortimer, I would say that he would be the reasoner. He is essentially the person who, like I've explained, is there and realizes that what is going on might not be right and tries to stop it. He's the one with logic and sense. His aunts are very happy-go-lucky and oblivious to what they are doing is wrong. They know that it's not killing people. They know that killing people is wrong. However, they are justifying their actions in the sense of, oh, these men are lonely. They don't have anywhere to live. We're taking them out of their misery. That's their whole thing. Jonathan was just evil. I have to admit, Jonathan was just scary. When I was reading this, he was constantly, in the stage directions, he constantly was depicted of having a serious, almost cynical demeanor, and being very manipulative with his facial expressions and his voice, and his actions. Jonathan, at one point in time, when Elaine came over a second time after Jonathan had came, and he, in a way, tried to kill her. He wasn't unsuccessful, of course, but it was very scary on how domineering he could be, especially towards his family. If I had to think of what Jonathan would be in terms of a person, I would say that he is a... How do I word this? You know those kids that are like, no, Mom, let me be me. If not, that was... They're like, no, Mom, let me be me. Please, you know, you don't understand, Mom. It's not a phase. And then also curse their mothers out and partake in very legal underage activities. That be Jonathan. That spoiled, very conniving and cynical child. Elaine, I love Elaine. Elaine is kind of just there at times, but Elaine is actually the daughter of a pastor. And there's a lot of tensions between her and Mortimer. The reason why they end up trying to rush their engagement and their marriage is because they are very impatient individuals when it comes to expressing their love for one another. So they are trying to push that up, and they do care for each other a lot, but Elaine is very down to earth. When the whole fiasco of why Jonathan was being so secretive and not going to the play, although they had agreed to go, and him constantly just acting weird after their engagement, she was very head on and said that you need to calm down and figure out whatever is going on, because this is not okay. She was very strong-willed, and that's something I really liked about her character. Other characters that were quite interesting, there was one particular officer who came to essentially check on the Brewster sisters because he saw that the lights to their house were still on at like 2 in the morning. And he was like, I'll just check on them right before my shift. And he came in, Jonathan was there, had a whole talk had a whole talk with Jonathan. And yeah. He ended up telling Mortimer a play idea that he had because, like I said, Mortimer was in fact a play critic, theater critic, if you will. And it went on for hours and hours, and the officer in question actually ended up getting suspended a little bit because he failed to report into the station, and there was a manhunt for him. So that was really fun. But the characters of this play really embody different ideologies when it comes to how you should approach life and how it is appropriate to approach life. The mindset of Jonathan is very cynical, and I've said it like 8,000 times, but he was really scary and really intimidating. And that goes to show that some people on this planet aren't the nicest, aren't the most caring, and want what they want and will stop at nothing to get what they want. The sisters were very kind-hearted individuals that went about their kind-heartedness the wrong way. And maybe it's because of their age, maybe it is because of their undiagnosed mental illnesses, if they have any. Um, they didn't realize that the significance and severity of their actions. Mortimer, like I said, is the person who reels everybody in and is like, hey, stop doing that. Teddy is, he's Teddy. He's Teddy. He lives in his own world and can't conceptualize what is going on around him. The sisters actually, not that they per se asked him to, but Teddy would constantly like to dig in the basement. So what Teddy ended up doing for them was digging burial sites within the the cellar. That's how they describe it, because basements are concrete based. This was dirt, because how else would you dig concrete? Anyway, he would dig in the cellar and make these graves for the people that the sisters had killed. And in Teddy's world, he was digging graves for people who died of yellow fever in Panama. And he referred to the cellar as the Panama Canal. In that sense, Teddy was so incredibly in his own world. And in a way, the sisters kind of took advantage of his situation. Not necessarily ill-intently, but they did. So, and then all the other people, like the superintendent and the victims and the officers and even Elaine's father, who is one of the first people we meet in this play, all kind of help support the story. And Dr. Einstein all help support the story and get the idea around of this mortality ideal. Joseph Kesselring, who happens to be the playwright of this play, was quite an interesting person. He was very fond of the arts from when he was young. He initially started off as an actor and as a singer, and actually worked at a Mennonite school and taught theater and music. He ended up moving into playwriting after he was not too warmly accepted by his peers and the administrators at the Mennonite school, because they claimed that his love for the arts came off a little too secular for their highly conservative institution. So he endeavored into playwriting. He wrote several plays, and his production is so widely known today and still performed at big company theaters and small local theaters alike, and loved by theater fanatics, theater critics, and theater people themselves. I must admit, there were so many parts of this play that I really liked, and there were a few that I wasn't too fond of. I just want to preface this by saying that this section of this video is entirely my opinion and based off of my observations. If you disagree, feel free to debate in the comments or offer your own opinion. I will 100% be respectful of yours in hopes that you'll be respectful of mine. So, without further ado, what did I like? I really liked the concept of this play. I tend to gravitate towards things of very interesting concepts, and things that tend to be a little bit more on the darker side of dark comedy, and the comedic side of dark comedy. But this play really brought out the ideals of satire and absurdism in this circumstance. I think several lines in the play, like when Mortimer lifts up the bay window curtain and sees Mr. Hoskin's dead body, along with the later on in the play, there is irony when Mortimer is telling Dr. Einstein what play he had seen recently. And as he is telling, well, it's a combination of these, as Mortimer describes it, ridiculously rudimentary and overdone ideals of how scenes go in plays. And one of them is when a villain is trying to, for lack of better words, kill a protagonist or a character in general. And as he is retelling this plot, Jonathan is ironically acting out this plot. And I have to say, during that section, I was rolling because everything Mortimer said Jonathan did. And I could just imagine that on stage being incredibly comedic. Something that I didn't necessarily like, though, was this is not author critique at all. It's the it's the font size. It is, and the font in itself. I tend to gravitate towards plays with bigger font sizes. An example of this would be Cost of Living. But this one was ETBT, very ETBT, in fact, and it took away from the experience of the play because I had to, at some points, kind of strain my eyes to see what was being written. Also, not that I do not necessarily dislike the stage design. I think that its complexity, if done well, could be very beautiful and really depict the Victorian style of the home that the Brewster sisters live in. However, when it comes to smaller budgeted productions of this, it would be very hard to achieve the setup. I will actually read what the setup is from this book. It says, if I can, these are, whew, child. It is quite interesting. It says, this is the description of Act
1. Act 1. Time, late afternoon, September, present. Place, the living room of an old Brewster home in Brooklyn, New York. It is just as Victorian as the two sisters, Abby and Martha Brewster, who occupy the house with their nephew, Teddy. There is a staircase. This part is the description of the staircase. The staircase and landing described here are a necessary part of the set as originally produced. However, in certain theaters, it may not be possible to construct a practical staircase and landing, in which case a wide entrance can be substituted for the bottom of the stairs, with perhaps 2 or 3 practical steps shown. Some rearrangement of business and lines will, of course, in this case, be necessary. Going back to the description of the act. Upstage right, leading to the upper floor, broken by a landing with a window looking out on the front porch. At the top of the stairs, a balcony with a door leading to bedrooms, and an archway beyond which are stairs to the top floor. There is a large window, downstage left, below which is a long window seat. There is a door upstage center that leads to the cellar, another to left of it that leads to the kitchen, and at right the main door of the house, which opens onto the porch downstage right. When the curtain rises, Abby Brewster, a plump little darling in her late 60s, is presiding at the tea table. The table is lighted by candles. Seated in armchair at her left is the Reverend Dr. Harper, and on her right, standing, her nephew Teddy, whose costume includes a frock coat and pince nez attached to a black ribbon. Teddy is in his 40s and has a large black mustache, and his manner and makeup suggest Theodore Roosevelt.
So, based off of that, as well as the stage diagram, you can see how a smaller theater will have a great ordeal trying to make this production work setting-wise. Should that be a complete discouragement? No. But it is just a sheer principle of it. And like I said, again, if it is done well and if it is done on a sufficient budget, it could look really nice. There also are a whole heck of a lot of props in here that, as the playwright and publishing company agree, aren't entirely necessary. Some are more necessary than others, but they're not all necessary. It's just the fact that there are so many of them, you know. I know personally, my friend Iris and I were looking into possibly putting this on at our school. We were going to pitch it for maybe a main stage or a studio-led production, anything along the lines of that. But if it were to be a studio production, it'd be very, very hard to accommodate the space to make it work for this play. Again, not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just the principle of it. There were also moments in the play where I felt were very, very long and a little unnecessary. That probably is because of the font size and the font in itself, not necessarily writing. As this was very successful back in its day. Like I said, it had over 1,400 shows within its Broadway run, and also got adapted into a movie, which was of huge success.
Nothing quite got the attention like Arsenic and Old Lace. It was very well received by critics for its time. Throughout the play, there are mentions of the events of the 1940s, and late 1930s, of World War II. And you can see the genuine interest in morality and human reason within this play, which was something that the critics were not quite expecting. And even more so, they did not expect the amazing comedic delivery of the lines and of the dialogue within this play.
And this is what truly put Joseph Kesselring on the map. So this is, like I said, this is solely my opinion and based off of what I've read about the play and have seen in the script. But this was a nice play overall. Did it have its ups and downs? Yes. But is it bad objectively? No, not at all. I think it's actually a really good play. What can I and yourselves take away from this particular play? One thing I would say that is a very valid takeaway is people view the world and wrongs and rights very differently. As I said a million times, Mortimer could understand that what everybody was doing was really wrong. Maybe minus Teddy. He just was sick of Teddy, but he could see that what everyone was doing was really wrong and they needed to stop it. And while the sisters knew what they were doing wasn't necessarily right, they justified it, and Jonathan couldn't care less. So that's one takeaway. Another takeaway would be that the way lineage can affect people isn't just physical, it's also mental. And the Brewster's grandfather, Jonathan's grandfather, and the Brewster's father was a mad scientist of his own and went to medical school in the whole 9 yards, but ended up getting his practice taken away because he was participating in malpractice. And it touches on mental illness and that people can have stuff wrong with them that's not just physically displayed. I also would say that this play really, it put a very satirical spin on these very serious conversations, and that every character really heavily played into an archetype. There were archetypes in this play, and that people also follow archetypes and all react differently to the same or similar circumstances. So that is all for this week's Play Review Dramaturgs. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, comment and share if you will. It would really help the channel and this experience as a whole. Let me know what you thought about this week's play. If you've read it, if you've seen the movie adaptation, anything, please let me know in the comments. That's all, dramaturgs. See you next time.